everyone. Welcome to the ILN Talk Show. This is our 14th episode, and we are very happy to welcome Mr. Bedirhan E.Mutlu from Turkey, who is a researcher in political science, and he holds an MA in political science from Sciences Po Paris, the very prestigious university. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tasnim, for inviting me.
Thank you for being with us. So I have already met Mr. Bedirhan in Tunis during our ILN 8th conference. He was one of our speakers, and he contributed so much to the diversity that we had during that conference. Today we're going to be talking about a very special topic. It goes under religious freedom, and we're going to talk about the history of public religious institutions in Tunisia. And it's the area focus of Mr. Bedirhan. I know he's from Turkey, but he might know better than I do on this regard, even though I'm from Tunisia. So if we can, start talking about, this topic, like broadly, if you can introduce our viewers to this topic a little bit, and then we will dive into the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again for this introduction. And so I guess we're going to talk about broadly the history or the present of public religious institutions in Tunisia, right? So when in most of the Sunni majority Muslim countries, official religious institutions are among, if not the key players in how people or citizens engage with religion, right? So in Tunisia, you have the historical Zitouna, which now is just a university, but it still continues to function. You have the Ministry of Religious Affairs. So you have equivalents of this ministry in different Muslim countries. In Turkey, it's a directorate, for instance. And then you have the Office of the Mufti in some countries, including Tunisia. And you might have other things like institutions on Awqaf, which doesn't exist in Tunisia, but exists in other countries. And then, so those are the kinds of institutions that we'll be talking about and how they relate to politics and how they relate to maybe democracy or freedom of religion and these kind of concepts. So this is what I'm aiming at talking about today.
And what brought you into these kind of topics? Why are you interested in these topics in the first place?
Okay, yeah. So I've been interested in understanding how religion and politics interact with one another, particularly in the Arab world or in the broader Muslim majority countries, right? And I've been interested in Tunisia, considering what happened in Tunisia after 2011. I was one of the people who was very much impressed by the Arab uprisings when they happened in 2011 because I was still in high school back then, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I've seen, as these movements like the Islamist rise and then the consequences, the divergence of consequences. And then I came into Tunisia, and then I was thinking about what can I do? Like, what is an interesting way to grasp? And then one thing I was interested in is basically understanding how religion and politics interact, right? How are the different ways in which political, social, religious, and civil society actors or citizens are making these two things, these two huge broad categories interact with one another. And then one thing that has been much less research in Tunisia was the case of official religious institutions, right? So there's a lot of works on in Nahda as a movement. There was some work on the growing civil society sphere, religious civil society sphere, but there was very few works, if any, about the public side of these things. And I wanted to look deeper into this because it has a history, and there's a lot of works about, for instance, Al-Azhar in
because
Egypt,
it's still running, maybe, but it's not the case.
But then if something is not running as it is in some other countries, why is that, right? So that was one of the key questions that I was interested in.
What were your findings?
So my findings were that, obviously there is a historical legacy, and of I don't know if maybe I should start with history of historical religious institutions in Tunisia, because then I can come maybe gradually to present, right? So the history is that in Tunisia you had the Zitouna, right? It's considered to be oldest university in the world. That's what they claim to be, at least, and it's very plausible that it is so.
One of the first universities. One of the first universities.
Yeah, it is, at least we know that it is one of the first founded universities in the world, right?
Yes.
And it was an Islamic school, Islamic university. I mean, what happened is, before the so it was kept intact. It has a history of over a millennium, right?
Yeah.
1,400 years nearly.
Except
And
for the period when the Portuguese colonized Tunisia and they turned it into a stable for 40 years.
yeah,
How
so
about that? Yeah.
yeah, so you have that, but on top of that, so the institution, in terms of, from how I understand it, it's not as we understand it today, right? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
go to Al Azhar today, it's not just the Al Azhar al Sharif that exists, the mosque and the
Yeah.
university campus that's in Cairo. It's a network.
Yes.
So it's a network that has branches around Cairo, but also all around Egypt. So this
Yeah.
is similar to what Zaytuna was like before the modern state was built in Tunisia, right? So it was home to about 30,000 students. So it was an educational system. It was not just one school. This was to me surprising coming from Turkey, right? When I came to first, I first saw this in Egypt in Al Azhar. I was like, I have a degree from Al Azhar, but I studied in Aswan, right? So this was similar to what was in place in Tunisia.
Yes.
But what happened is with Al Azhar and Zaytuna are completely different. So when the modern state happened in Tunisia, it wanted to transform Zaytuna into a faculty of theology, basically, in the
A
European
separate
system.
university. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what they wanted to do. So they sort of put the different branches of Zaytuna, like the secondary school, it had so all of those were put under the authority of the Minister of Education, typically. And the Zaytuna was reduced to a faculty of theology in 1957, if I'm not wrong. So it's
Yes.
one of the first acts of Bourguiba when he assumes
Yeah.
power. And this is a part of a larger project of Bourguiba, which is a project of modernization that, in his understanding, requires um, modernizing religion as well, with his terms, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
has an understanding of religion, and this is a very particular thing about Tunisian modern state, I think, about Bourguiba precisely, because people try to draw parallels between
Atatürk.
Atatürk and
I
Bourguiba,
was
and I
just going
think,
to ask about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so there is a divergence here that I find to
Okay.
be interesting and significant. Why? Because Bourguiba claims religious authority.
Yeah.
I don't think Atatürk that openly claimed religious authority, right? So Bourguiba is quoted saying, "I am the head of state, and
Yeah.
by the virtue of being head of state, I can give ijtihad," right? So ijtihad is religious exegesis,
Yes.
although he does not have religious training.
And
And
he
this is
doesn't believe in ijtihad in the first place, so
what
it's quite fascinating. He doesn't even believe in that mechanism, but he
I
wants to.
mean.
He claimed it to himself just to, take control of that
But
aspect.
it's interesting though. He claims religious authority, right? So this is a
Yes.
strong claim to have religious authority in my eyes. Atatürk doesn't do this. He doesn't personally claim religious authority, and I think this is very interesting because that means that he gets to meddle with the religious sphere, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that he's just pushing or trying to reduce religious activity. He
Yes.
is getting involved. So this is happening from within. He's trying to do it from within the
Yeah.
religious sphere, right? And
In
I
one
think
of
this is
the
very
incidents, he
interesting to notice.
actually gave, a fatwa or made
Yeah,
shuyukh give fatwa to let people, eat during a Ramadan day
yeah,
and stop fasting. But
yeah.
luckily, they did not allow him to do that.
Yeah, so this is similar. So he is involving himself very directly with religious field, right? And
In the
obviously
name
he,
of freedom.
yeah. So from with the freedom
Yeah.
of people, but with the functioning of religious authorities, right? And this is something that quite a bit number of religious authorities at the time react to. And then Zaytuna has this characteristic of also, when independence occurs, of allying itself with the anti-Bourguibists within the Disturian party, within the Neo-Distur, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
Bourguiba's rivals give a speech in Zaytuna. This also pisses off Bourguiba. So it's not just about his uh, political theory or his ideas.
Absolutely.
It's also a history of political rivalry. When a lot of the ulama ally themselves with his internal rivals within the Neo-Distur, he picks Zaytuna as a rival himself as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Zaytuna gets I don't want to call it shut down because it's not 100% shut down, but reduced to what it was historically, right? So it's
Yes.
dislocated from the mosque, right? The
Yes.
mosque becomes just a place of worship, and then he opens a faculty of theology within the University of Tunis, right?
Yes.
So it becomes the Zaytuna theology of faculty of theology, right?
Yes. But
And then with Ben Ali, this is very interesting also. But also, so while this happens, Zaytuna still has some people working there, right? There is still some sort of religious ulama. Some of them are sent into exile. You have people like An-Naifer,
yes.
not the current An-Naifer. His, I think they're related. I don't know if it's his great uncle or uncle. I don't remember.
Yes.
But
Right.
right,
Yeah.
Salah An-Naifer, and you have other people like that who are very popular ulama, very popular scholars, who oppose occasionally Bourguiba's reforms, right? And then they're either sent away from the university, sometimes they're sent into exile.
Yes.
Sometimes it happens, this is constant negotiations. Sometimes they're allowed back, after a while. And then when Ben Ali takes power, he transforms it, back into university. So sort of the symbolic sort of evaluation of Vituna, but with
Yeah.
regards to its size, it doesn't grow really. It actually shrinks, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It actually
Yeah.
shrinks with regards to its number of students and professors when Ben Ali takes over.
Mm-hmm.
Just a symbolic, a status sort of thing.
Yeah.
But another thing that occurs simultaneously is that some of the ulama start giving informal lectures in their houses and in mosques. And this is very interesting because I met a couple of people and a bunch of people, not maybe a bunch, but a few people from Nahda who are currently also doing religious activities who told they went into the houses or into the mosque to listen to these shuyukh or ulama from the
Who
Tuna.
held lessons at their houses.
Lessons, right? There is an informal dissemination of knowledge that occurs. And from what I understand, this has impacted or this has been a factor in the growth of the Nahda or what it
Another
was
party. Yeah.
movement, the Jama'ah or the Islamic tennis movement
Before
back
it
in the
became a political
yeah,
party.
before it became a political party.
Yes.
So this is an interesting connection, I think. And then the second institution that I have tried to research on is the Ministry of Religious Institutions, Religious Affairs, right?
Wait a second. Let's just stick to Zaytuna Mosque for a second. So, don't you think it's a big loss for Tunisia and for the Muslim
Uh,
world that an
mhm,
institution like that? I mean, for example, endowments,
mhm.
they're gone.
I mean,
And
look,
normally they can ensure the independence of ulama from the state, but now it's no
mhm,
longer the case. So they're not free. They're always
mhm,
like pounds to the
mhm.
authorities, which is a big loss, right?
Um, it is a loss in a sense, yes, I agree. But this is one thing I want to draw attention to is that Al Azhar today is very strong and powerful and large. But what is the extent of success of Al Azhar today in Egypt, right?
In
Although
terms
it's
of what?
large, although it functions in the sense of um, to what extent does Al Azhar contribute to our understanding of Islam, or in the sense of to giving Islam a contemporary, um successful, positive phase within the world, or even within the Islamic world,
Well, it
right?
is producing
It is producing a lot of work, yes,
literature
but
and ulama, and isn't it?
it's true. It's doing much more than what Zaytuna is doing. I'm 100%, yes,
Yeah.
but in the same time, I don't think the size alone should be taken as the sole predictor of something.
So
That's what I'm trying
what is
to
wrong
say.
with Azhar in
What's
your
wrong with Al-Azhar is
yeah.
it's. I mean, many things happened in Al-Azhar in the last century that they themselves predicted limited religious freedom of many of their own professors in the
Yes.
course of the 20th century, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
there are cases of this where people have been accused of apostasy within Al-Azhar. So this is, I think, a problem of Al-Azhar as well. So they have
Yeah.
an orthodoxy. Their orthodoxy is not. It's not. It's it's not as open as it could have been. And I have friends who studied in Al-Azhar, and they still complain about the how the educational methods are still as if they're dating back from 3 4 decades ago.
They're
I
not
don't know. I
updated.
haven't studied from there personally,
Hmm.
but I have known people who studied at Azhar and who have been complaining about the educational methods of the university. Right?
Because they're not updated. They're not
They're
modern
not
enough.
updated. Exactly. They're not up to date.
Okay. Okay,
So
but at least it's running and there is room for
yeah,
improvement. We can fix it. But in our case, it's gone.
I don't think so. So this is my
Oh,
sort of
okay.
pushback to you now. So
Right.
what else has been happening? I don't know what's going to happen today with what's happening in Tunisia, but after the revolution, what I realized that Zitouna had a chance to rediscuss its identity. So
Mm-hmm.
this was one of my main findings when I did my master's thesis in Tunisia.
Okay.
Because after the revolution, it doubled in size with regards to its faculty, with regards to its number of students.
Okay.
In a span of 3 years,
But we're still talking about the university. See, I'm
the
talking about
university,
the mosque and the
no, not the
university.
mosque, the
I
university.
know, but I'm talking about that. It's not like before. It's never
It's not
gonna be
like
like
before. No,
yeah.
it's not like before. It's not going to come back as before. I think to Tunisia again. I don't think so. But
Mm-hmm.
so it is. So what happens? The mosque has become a place of worship. There were tries to reactivate sort of some sort of informal or traditional classes to
Yes.
larger publics within the mosque. That initiative failed.
Yes.
But at the same time, the university grew, and I think it's important to notice that the university grew.
Yes.
And why?
And
Because
it grew from international students as well. I have a lot of people from the
yes,
larger Muslim majority countries, especially Malaysia. And I don't know what they're doing here because they have the Malaysia, Islamic
yeah,
universities. I don't know what
yeah.
they're doing, what they're
Because
doing
Zitouna
here.
has a historical image still. It has a heritage, and the heritage means a lot in the minds of a lot of people.
Maybe, yeah, yeah.
Um, and this still resonates with, and also it has what people from Zitouna claim to be, the Islam al-Wasatiyah, right? So
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Islam of moderation is
Yes.
their point of reference. That's what they call into. And people are trying to, what I've seen after the revolution is that people, scholars, students, are trying to hang on to this heritage, this identity. And I think it's
Mm.
important, and I don't think it's non-consequential. And a second thing that occurred after the revolution is that not Ennahda, I'm sorry, Zitouna assumed institutional authority from the state interference. So now the faculty of Zitouna are free to appoint the directors of the institutes and the
Mhm.
president of the university. So it's similar to what happened in Al-Azhar after the revolution. So the president of the university is
Yeah.
appointed from within the university without with, at least legally, without from interference from the state, right?
That is the
And
Ministry of Higher Education.
no, it's not appointed by the Minister of Higher
Yeah,
Education.
normally they are. Like it's the case with the other universities
Yeah,
at least.
so the
Okay.
university gathers together to elect the university president.
Okay.
So this
Okay.
has been gained after the revolution.
All right. Interesting. I didn't know
They have
about
a
that.
say in appointing it. So and this is an important thing that happened there. And it's also interesting to see that Zitouna, on some occasions after the revolution, the president and the faculty opposed political figures, including President Bashar Sepsi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
They
early on. Yeah.
what
Early
in
on, right after the
no
revolution. So before
in 2018 in
oh, when he became
2018.
president, I thought when
Yeah,
he
after he
was
became
prime
president.
minister.
No, after he became
Okay.
president, Zitouna professors and Zitouna faculty came
Right.
together and they published opinions on several occasions, opposing the decisions or projects of President Sepsi. And on some occasions, they have been in struggle with the Minister of Religious Affairs, because the Minister of Religious Affairs is much more directly controlled
Yeah.
by state authority. So, and one of these things happened when there's an institute in Kairouan, which is an antenna, if you want, of the tuna. So there is an institute in
Yes.
Kairouan which is in
Yes.
charge of training imams currently. This was
Yes.
under joint supervision of the Ministry of Religious Affairs and of Zitouna. But the
Yes.
ministry, according to the Zitouna president, of the time refused to give the allocated funds for the functioning. And there has been a struggle between the Ministry of Religious Affairs and Zitouna, right? So two religious institutions of the same state, which are both public institutions, are in sort of have been in a quarrel with one another at some point. But this shows, I think, that there is an autonomy that's being gained in Zitouna right now, and it also shows that religious actors had the chance to more freely interact with one another, and that there's competition among them, I think. So the ministry is now, for the majority, for mostly, is back to what it was before the revolution, but not completely. There is also more increased freedom. Like before, there was more police control over the imams. Before, the Ministry of the Interior had much more of a say of what the Minister of Religious Affairs did. The Minister of Religious Affairs didn't have local branches before the revolution. It now has local branches. But still, there's still some form of state control over the imams, particularly after the 2014-2013 events in Tunisia, in 2015, when there was a rise of terrorists who identified themselves with Islam, right? So this sort of in a struggle to fight against extremist currents, the state felt the need, I think, to increase its presence or its control of religious institutions. Now, you can argue this is not the only way to do it, but this was the easiest way they found to do it, and they did it for a purpose. And I personally understand that was a purpose.
So, in relation to, I mean, if we see all of this in relation to democracy and religious,
in relationship to democracy, so there are certain ways in which democratic countries interact with religious institutions, right? And democracy, in my understanding, requires some form of autonomy for the state so that the will of the people can be expressed.
So like it used to be, for example, like Zaytuna used to be before, or do you prefer this way? Do you prefer this format?
Oh, I don't think it's, this is a big question. I mean, I don't think either are appropriate. Because what it used to be was a traditional institution, and modernization has affected the world in such a radical way, at least in my understanding, that the traditional educational institutions had to do some reform. And this is something that everyone agreed upon. When you look at Al-Azhar, there's a very interesting book about this, about the reform in Al-Azhar by Indra Falkasing, I think, where she shows that even the so-called conservative ulama or the traditional ulama, so we're not talking about people like Afghani or Abdo, right? People who oppose Afghani and Abdo's reforms, they themselves wanted to do some form of reform as well, right? So the agreement even for Zitouna is the same. Everyone wanted to do the reform. The divergence is the way in which reform should be conducted, I think, right? So some reform was needed. The way in which it was done in Tunisia was, I think, radical, and I think it was disruptive. So I think it's created a void in religious sphere in Tunisia, and I think this void created in religious sphere. Now I have to do more work on this, but my understanding is it's one of the reasons why Tunisia has seen so much drive towards radicalism. Towards
that void, someone had to fill it. And they did.
Yeah, because people had a demand for religious practice and religious beliefs, because overwhelming majority of Tunisians are Muslims, right? So there was a demand for religious offer, if you want to term it in this economic words, right? But the Tunisian local offer of religion, if I want to term it very broadly like this, I know this is not maybe the correct word to use, but to make it allegorically, meaningful, it was not sufficient. So people went to external sources very often, and this created a huge disruption I think in Tunisian religious sphere, because the local production of religious sources or religious life was so limited that people had to turn to outside foreign sources, which typically came with more radical ideas, right? Or extremist, violent ideas occasionally. And I think this is something to dig into. As I'm saying, I didn't dig into this as sufficiently as I have to. I will do it hopefully. It's one of my research sort of projects that I have for the broader future. But
Yeah.
I think there's something that's interesting there to look into, because when you see and interestingly, because religious authority and political authority were so linked to one another in Tunisia, when one crumbled in the revolution, the religious authority also crumbled, right? So
Domino
the
effect.
Ministry of Religious Affairs lost control of the mosques.
Mm-hmm.
Zitouna was trying to reinvent itself, and it was just inventing people from around to start to understand what it wants to be in this new revolutionary environment. I think it had some partial success in having autonomy, in creating an identity again among the students, among the professors. And I think it grew a little bit in size. It grew in terms of its activity. It requires more resources, definitely, but I think it has some sort of reactivation. I think that's important to notice. And I think I want to draw a comparison. Oh, okay, we're back. A comparison with Iraq here, because in Iraq, you had the rise of ISIS, right?
Yes.
And interestingly, I'm not a scholar of Iraq, but interestingly, when Saddam Hussein was in power, the religious authority, the Sunni religious authority, was very closely linked to the authority of the state. But the Shia were, of course, the state was controlled by Saddam's Sunni, right? But the Shia were not. The Shia had their of marja. So this is a specificity of Shia Islam. And when sort of the political authority fell down in Iraq, the Sunni religious authority also fell down. And if you look at it, ISIS managed to attract much more people from the Sunni sphere, right? And this is interesting to notice, and this is normal. But the Shia didn't go into this process of radicalization in the same way, in my understanding, at least. As I'm saying, this is not my specialty. And
interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
but they have Hezbollah. I mean, just
yeah, it's
when
different, but it's
armed
different. Hezbollah is
force,
different. Hezbollah is the it's, I think, much more
I mean,
related.
it's different, but my point is that they wouldn't go behind ISIS anyway, because they have
Yeah,
their
they wouldn't. Of
alternative.
course they wouldn't,
I'm
because
not comparing Hezbollah to ISIS, but I'm just saying that any Shia person wouldn't
Hezbollah
go.
didn't emerge in the same setting. It
Yeah, but I'm
emerged
just saying
in a
that
different setting.
Shia wouldn't go behind ISIS
That's
anyway.
a counter argument. It's true, but other things would have emerged when the ISIS emerged.
Probably, yeah.
And they didn't emerge. I think there's something interesting. So my whole point is from these examples is that religious void can lead to extremism in certain cases. Is I think an argument that I'm making here. And then if you go back to Tunisia, it's what's particularly, I think, important to understand is also that the Tunisian sort of way of dealing with religious institutions was not secularism, right? So this is something some people call sometimes, the Tunisian secularism, Almania. It was not secularism.
We use that a lot, and we think that, I mean, most Tunisians think that Tunisia is more laic than France itself.
I personally disagree, because this is one thing I wanted to notice, so I want to talk about as well, because if you look at the theory of laïcité and how it was formulated as an institutional arrangement, its tenets are religious freedom and state neutrality. Founding religious institutions and putting them under state control, in my understanding of laïcité, it doesn't fall under the umbrella of laïcité, right? Because you're creating religious institutions, for one, and for two, you're putting them under state control. This is not the premises of laïcité. Laïcité is based on
you put them under state control so that you control them, and they don't really interfere with the other state issues. So it's not that you're putting them in value or anything. It's not that.
It doesn't matter in any way. You are controlling religious institutions. Look at France. The French state does not
control. As long as the religious institutions do not control or do not have a say in the state affairs. The other way around is fine for a secular state.
I disagree, because I don't think this is I think this is not a secular state, basically. So this was already in place in France, actually. What was in place in France with the Napoleon's Concordat in 1872 was some sort of Gallicanism, which is basically the state authority control of religion. This was already in place in France since 1872.
Yes,
And the
true.
law of 1905 changed this in France. And I think even the French people do not know this very well. The 1905 law in French of laïcité is not the one of Jacobin control of religious institutions. To the contrary, it was forced by the liberals of the French Third Republic. And
Yeah.
its premise is basically opposing this Napoleonic control of religious institutions. To the contrary, the French laïcité of 1905 is based on the premise of the non-reconnaissance, but also independence of religious institutions,
Okay.
right? So the French laïcité is based on the fact that the French state does not recognize, either symbolically or financially, any religious institutions.
And you think
Right?
it's not the case here? It's not
It's
close to
not the case in
we have
Tunisia at
here.
all. No, the state
Okay.
not only recognizes the modern state has founded new religious institutions in the last century, and it took the already independent institutions under its control. This is what Napoleon did. This is not what the 1905 law did in France. This is what Napoleon did
But you
in
know, when you say under its control, it means that it's making sure to make it not thrive. You know, just like what Bourguiba did. You
yeah,
know, the
but this
reason
is
why we're
also
saying, huh?
yeah. So when Napoleon took it under control, yes, he relied on religious authority.
Yes.
So for him,
Because he was
religious authority
influenced by the
was
French. That I'm just trying to explain why Tunisians think this way. Because Bourguiba did what he
yeah.
did
No, I
because he
understand.
was secular
I
himself. Yeah.
yeah, I understand. Bourguiba himself might have secular. Secular has many understandings, right?
Yes.
Bourguiba might be secular in terms of his way of life, as we understand of like non-practicing or something like that, right? But
Yeah.
that doesn't make Tunisian state secular. This is, I think, an important distinction, and I don't think Tunisian state was ever secular since history,
Yeah,
because
but because just talking about him removing prestigious university or institution like the Zaytuna University, that's like the heart of the entire thing. Why did he do that? Because he is secular and he wanted to make the state secular. That's like the
yeah,
formula. Yeah.
but his understanding of secularism was not secular in at the intent.
Okay, that's another level
Right?
of
So
discussion.
I mean I don't know what Bourguiba, but I also don't think Bourguiba had I this should be looked into, but I don't think Bourguiba, from what I understand, he because he didn't put laïcité in the constitution like Atatürk did, right?
Wouldn't be able to at that stage because
So
Zaytuna
there's no
University ulama were still, alive and they were powerful, and listened to. But anyway,
yeah,
just let's go beyond the individual, him as a person.
yeah. I
Um,
mean I don't think
as
individual. I mean
as a head of state who
yeah.
would do that, who would dare, shut down a prestigious and a
Mhm.
historical, religious institution like that. Is that part of democracy or the democracy that he claimed to bring
Oh,
to the country after the independence?
I mean, does anyone consider Tunisia to be a democracy after
Of
1957? I
course,
don't
but
think.
it's not, of course, but he was trying to. He was, trying to
Uh-huh.
tell that
Well,
to the
okay, so there's
to the
different
people.
ways. I think people like Bourguiba, very pragmatics, who who had, and they were very ideologically motivated, and they were
Yeah.
not uh, super open to d- deliberation or discussion with regards to their
He
appointment.
chose to be a president for life,
And
anyways. Even political freedom is not. I mean,
so
it's
yeah, so in
not the
an
case.
environment where there is no political freedom, obviously religious freedom didn't thrive. That's clear, I think.
Yes.
But there was a modernization project at hand, and that
Hmm.
modernization project was already decided upon by Bourguiba or people around him, right? So the founders of the state, and the founders of the state had very clear ideas about what this modernization project meant, and they wanted to implement that modernization project no matter what, because they think this was the way to make Tunisia succeed and make Tunisia reach sort of the level of modern developed countries, right? So
They
this was very
focused a
similar
lot
to
on education and making it
yeah.
mandatory
So
and everything.
these,
Yeah,
as for
that
them,
was
religious
it.
authorities were an obstacle. I think that's clear, and religious authorities were an obstacle in the sense of they were political enemies, right? So when you have political enemies, so then when an institution becomes a political enemy in a non-democratic context, in a non-democratic context, right? Political enemies are eliminated. That's just what happens. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
saying.
So are you just saying implicitly that?
I'm not saying this is what should be done, right? I'm not trying to defend any of these positions.
No, no, no.
I'm
I'm
just
just
saying
saying
that
that you think that
it's what happens all around the world.
religious shuyukh, I mean shuyukhs or people of ilm shouldn't even be part of the political spectrum,
Oh,
just to make the religious affairs of a
mm-hmm.
country separate and
Okay.
free as much
Mm-hmm.
as they can. Are you saying that?
I mean, if you're asking my personal opinion, I
Yes.
think religion is something that has social and public implications,
Uh-huh.
and that's natural and that's understandable. So anyone can have a role in engaging with the public debate, including
Mm-hmm.
religious scholars, including this is normal. But what's important, at least in my understanding, my personal views at least, is to be aware that the state can function without control of religious institutions, and by the same token, the state can function without controlling the religious institutions. I'll try to formulate it because the two things are not
Okay.
mutually exclusive. So I'll give you an example, right? So, for instance, if you look at the case of Canada, right, they have a
Uh-huh.
different system there. In the Canadian system, the religious communities are they can express themselves, they can be recognized by the state, they can be given religious people can be given specific accommodations. Let's say, for instance, you have this actually I lived this when I was studying in Canada, right? I had a friend who was Catholic,
Uh-huh.
and we had a test on the Easter, and he asked for an accommodation because he was a practicing Catholic to have take sort of do the exam on another date, and this demand was accepted by the university, which is a public institution, right? It's a state
It
university.
wouldn't it wouldn't happen in France. Never, ever.
It wouldn't have been in France, no.
Yeah.
But the same thing would have applied to a Muslim student for Ramadan or Eid, for instance, probably,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I am 99% sure of that, right? So
Well, I
this
mean,
means that state.
just a second. Here in Tunisia, our schedules, for example, at university or high school, are not really done based on the salawat prayer. So you're not, even
Mhm,
if you're asked to go to Jumu'ah prayer, you're not allowed to if you have work. You
mhm.
know, you
Well,
see. So we are kind of secular. We're not like the other Muslim majority countries in this
no,
regard.
no, you're not. So this is
Yeah.
one thing. So there are certain things Bourguiba took from French laïcité. There are
Even the
certain principles.
headscarf, the problem with the headscarf. I
Yeah.
mean, before the
So
revolution, it was
okay. So
not. I mean, in Iran,
these
they're
are
talking about
specificities.
being mandatory, but in
Mhm.
Tunisia, it was mandatory not to wear it. I mean, it was
Yeah.
prohibited not to wear it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
here is my contention. Here is my contention. You don't have to agree to it, right? I mean, obviously, but is that the Tunisian understanding of religion and state took from the French laïcité more formalistic aspects rather than the real content. This is my understanding, at least. So the
Mm-hmm.
French laïcité has what they call a theory of appearances. So neutrality
Yeah.
of state is a way to assure secularism in many countries, not just in France. Neutrality of
Yeah.
state. And how is this neutrality assured? In France, it has to be neutrality of appearances. This is the French theory of laïcité, right?
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
have to appear neutral to be able to be neutral. So you don't, if you're a public official, you cannot carry a, a religious
Across.
symbol,
Yeah.
right? A cross or a headscarf they consider. There's
Yeah.
problems. There's many problems with that I can
I
underline. But
know. Yeah.
let's not go into the details of it, right? There's theoretical issues and practical issues. But theoretical issues is okay. I'll give you a very brief. Like, theoretical issue is if you are banning a religious symbol by the sake of it being a religious symbol, this means that you as a state have the right to decide what corresponds to a religious symbol. And
Yes.
who gets to decide what's religion and what's not religion? This is the job of a theologian. This is the job of a scholar, right? A theologian is the person who says what is religion and what's not
Yes.
religion. And if you, as a state, need to ban religious symbols, then you have to decide what's the religious symbol. How do you dissociate between a purely cultural symbol and a religious symbol, right?
Yeah.
So this requires religious expertise, and this means that state needs to have religious expertise, which then again
Does it?
contradicts the very idea of laïcité, right? This means that state has to have religious. So this is a paradox of laïcité, I think, right?
Yeah.
Theoretically, and then in practice, in France, the state gives all sort of recognition to Catholicism, right? Christmas trees everywhere put down by
But when it comes to
neutralities. Where is the neutrality of appearance in that, right? So there are issues with French laïcité, right?
right,
But
yeah,
what I'm saying is that Tunisian laïcité is not French laïcité either. There
yeah,
might be issues
sure.
with French laïcité, but Tunisian laïcité took the neutrality of appearances from the French laïcité. So neutrality of appearances. This is what especially Ben Ali tried to put in place in Tunisia.
Do you think it is similar to the Turkish laïcité?
Of course, yes. Turkish laïcité also took this. We also have the neutrality of appearances. And then there's a growing talk in France now about how religion needs to be a private thing and it should not have public manifestation, which is, in my view, a complete ununderstanding of what religion is for many religions around the world, right?
It should be displayed in the first place. Yeah.
Because religion has social implications. I mean, this is how, if you ask any scholar who works on religion, they will tell you that religion has social implications. And community is a part. And there's a book I've sort of been meddling with very recently. It's called Arguing Islam,
Okay.
right? And in this book, it's I think it's about how actually Islam is part of the public debate in many Muslim majority countries, right? So this doesn't mean necessarily that religious institutions will control political authority, but that people see religion as part of public debate. So now, and this is interesting, I think, to discuss, because it might be that in some societies, religion constitutes a part of public debate. And it doesn't necessarily follow, though, that religion will, or religious authorities will control the state, So I think that political authorities will control these authorities, right? I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between the two. You can publicly discuss religion. You can make religion sort of present in the public life. You can make it public. You can make it visible, but you can still create an institutional separation between state authorities and religious authorities. In my eyes, those two things don't necessarily need to go together, right?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect note to end. I mean, this is your conclusion, right? What you just said.
This is this is my theoretical conclusion with regards to not just Tunisia, but I think there are ways in which this is being done, and it can be done in other places. Yeah, this is, I think, my main conclusion.
So, just one final question, and just maybe your concluding remarks. Don't you think that ideology plays a lot in this field in religion? I mean, people might not be religious, but they have ideological beliefs, and that kind of dictates how they interact with other different ideologies, and then it has implications to political and religious freedom of the country, particularly in Tunisia.
One thing is, political entrepreneurs can shift public opinions. There are studies on this, right? So if you have ideologies are there generally to simplify. It's one of they have different functions, but one function of ideology is to simplify the political game and the political competition. And this is typically simplify sometimes because there's thousands of issues, right? And left and right. This is how it's perceived, for instance, left and right, economically speaking, right? It is two major blocks that simplify a myriad of issues, right? So they simplify for ordinary citizens the different issues, right? So this is one function. Ideology has many functions. This is one function that I'm referring to right now, right? So one function of ideology is to simplify the political game, and as a consequence of this, people identify with certain ideology and with certain political figures, political entrepreneurs, politicians,
Yes.
whatsoever. And those political entrepreneurs, in turn, can have an influence on how people think and the ideology that they identify with and how they oppose other people,
Yes.
right? So political entrepreneurs can shift public opinions as well. Not all of them can do it, but some of them can do it. This is important to note. And then secondly, there are other interests sometimes that are joined with ideology, right? So ideologies can be promoting the interests of certain classes, certain social groups, certain I don't know, regions, certain whatsoever, right? There is also the second thing. So ideologies can be connected to other interests as well. So when those things interact, people sometimes oppose certain things due to this polarization, right? So ideology is part of this polarization, I think, and
Yes.
polarization can lead people to opposing certain ideas, certain projects, certain laws, even, right? Because of this polarization, and yes,
Yeah.
and in that
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
you're right.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I mean, we've been talking about for about 46 minutes. Can you believe
Yeah,
it? Yeah. All right. I think I hope that we covered, the most important points of this topic, and I hope that our viewers benefited from this talk. And if you have any further questions, we'll put the contact and the email of Mr. Bedirhan in the description. And yeah, thank you very much for being with us, and
thank you.
hopefully we'll have you soon in different ILN conferences or workshops or online activities. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Goodbye.